Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum. Before performing the mandatory prayers, there are 5 things that we have to consider that can affect the correctness of our prayers. Those 5 things are ritual purity, clothing, the place that we pray, the time that we pray, and the direction of prayer. So the first topic that we'll talk about is ritual purity, or in Arabic, tahara. Now, there are 2 kinds of purity that we have to consider before praying salah. One we can call inner purity, and the other we can call outer purity. Now, inner purity is not referring to anything really deep or spiritual necessarily, although there are meaningful elements to this. But by inner purity, we just mean a state of purity that is attained normally through wudu. In some cases, it requires ghusl, and in some cases, tayammum. After performing wudu, one attains this state of purity that's required for prayer. And of course, wudu and ghusl and tayammum can be made necessary again through different actions, and those details are for a different discussion. But that's one type of purity that's required for prayers. Outer purity just refers to the absence of any ritually unclean substances. There's a list of substances that in Islam are considered najis or ritually impure. And if our body or clothes have those substances on them, or if they've come in contact with those substances, then they need to be purified. So our body and clothes need to be pure and clean from those substances. That's different from the inner purity because, for example, and people get this confused often, if you have performed wudu, you're in the state of purity from that point of view. But if you get some substance on your arm, for example, that is ritually impure, like blood, this doesn't have any effect on your inner purity, on your state of wudu. It simply has an effect on your outer purity, so the existence of this substance. And so, for example, it's not necessary to perform wudu again. It's just necessary to clean the substance off of your arm and then to purify your arm with water. So both of those types of purity are necessary for our prayer to be correct. The next topic has to do with clothing that's worn during prayer. For the amount of clothing that's required during prayer in order for the prayer to be correct, it differs for men and for women. For men, what's required is to cover the private parts, and it's better if it's from at least the navel to the knees. For women, they're required to cover their entire body, except for their hands up to the wrist, feet up to the ankles, and the area of their face that's washed during wudu. Also, for clothing, there's a requirement that it be ritually clean, so in the previous topic under ritual purity, meaning that the clothing should not have any impure substances on them. Or if they have come in contact with impure substances and those substances have been removed, that the clothing has to go through a process of purification. Also, clothing has to be lawfully used or obtained. So if it belongs to someone else, you have to have the permission of that person to use the clothing. It should not be obviously stolen or acquired in some unlawful way. Another requirement is it shouldn't be made of the parts of an animal whose meat is haram to eat. Haram meat can be because of 2 reasons. It might be because it's essentially haram to eat, because it comes from an animal that, no matter how it's slaughtered, it's haram to eat the meat of that animal. Or it could be from an animal who the meat is halal to eat if it's properly slaughtered, but the animal has not been properly slaughtered. So, for example, leather from a cow on someone's jacket, for example, if they're wearing a jacket. It's okay to wear that jacket if the cow had been slaughtered properly according to Islamic law, but it's not okay to wear that jacket if the cow had not been slaughtered properly. On the other hand, if you're wearing a piece of clothing like a belt, for example, made of alligator skin or something like that, then the meat is haram to eat, and it doesn't matter how it's slaughtered. Also, for men, there's a special, especially for men or only for men, the clothing should be free of gold or silk. The third prerequisite of prayer is the place that we're performing the prayer. Some requirements of the place are that it's used lawfully. So if it doesn't belong to us, if it's not our property, then we should have the permission of the owner to use it, which just means that the owner doesn't have a problem for us using that place. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to go get direct permission to directly pray there, but if you know that the owner is okay with you using that place, then using it for prayer is included in that. It also should not be a place that's moving, so like a moving vehicle, for example. Also, another requirement is that it should be spacious enough to perform all the motions and positions of prayer. In terms of ritual cleanliness, it should be ritually pure, but the requirement is only for that place that you prostrate and you place your forehead during prostration. That place has to be ritually pure. The rest of the places of the prayer, they just can't be damp enough so that when you touch them, the impurity would be transferred to your body or to your clothing. Another requirement is it can't be on an incline or decline. It can slightly be inclined or declined, but the difference in height or in elevation between the place you put your forehead during prostration and between the place where your toes touch during prostration can't be more than 4 finger widths difference in elevation, so which is a very small difference. So the place needs to be relatively level. The fourth consideration that we'll talk about is the time of prayer. Now, of course, when you're performing a mandatory prayer, especially the 5 daily prayers, you can't just pray them anytime you want. There's a certain time that you have to pray them in order for them to be correct and for it to count and be considered your performing your duty as far as that prayer is concerned. So we have 5 daily prayers, of course: the morning prayer or the Fajr prayer, the noon prayer or the Dhuhr prayer, the afternoon Asr prayer, what we could call the sunset prayer or Maghrib, and the evening prayer or Isha. The time for the morning Fajr prayer is from the time of what they call the second dawn, or also is referred to as true dawn. Now, when there's a transition from nighttime into morning, the light of the sun starts to show up on the eastern horizon. And the first showing of light of the sun is what they call a false dawn. And it shows as a column of light on the horizon. But shortly after that is what they call true dawn, or the second dawn. And instead of a column of light, as you can see in this picture here, the light is horizontal and parallel to the horizon, rather than being a column of light perpendicular to the horizon. So with the true dawn, with the appearance of true dawn, this is when the beginning of the time for Fajr prayer or the morning prayer begins. For the noon prayer, which in Arabic is Dhuhr prayer, the beginning of the time for this prayer is at the decline of the sun from the midpoint in the sky. So as this picture depicts, as the sun travels over the sky throughout the day from east to west, it reaches a midpoint, or a highest point that it will reach in the sky. And once it begins going down from that point, this is the beginning of the time for the noon prayer. The ending of the time for that prayer is almost to the time for Maghrib, but it's when you only have enough time to prepare the Asr, to perform the Asr prayer at that point. This is the end of the time for the Dhuhr prayer. For the Asr prayer, or the afternoon prayer, the beginning of the time for this prayer is from the completion of the Dhuhr prayer. So if you pray Dhuhr at the beginning of its time, as soon as you finish Dhuhr prayer, then it's time. It's the time when you can properly perform the Asr prayer, and it would be correct. And the ending of the time for the Asr prayer is Maghrib. The sunset prayer, Maghrib prayer, doesn't start at sunset, the time for that, so the name may be a little misleading. But after sunset, meaning after the sun disappears on the western horizon, there's a redness in the sky. Once this redness passes over and disappears from the eastern half of the sky after sunset, that's the beginning of the time for the Maghrib prayer. And the ending of the time for the Maghrib prayer is when it's approaching Islamic midnight, which we'll talk about how to calculate Islamic midnight. When there's only enough time to perform the Isha prayer before Islamic midnight, that's the end of the time for the Maghrib prayer. So the evening prayer, the Isha prayer, the time for it starts at the completion of the Maghrib prayer until Islamic midnight. So Islamic midnight is not the same as 12 midnight, not always anyway, but it's calculated as halfway between the time of sunset and the beginning of the Fajr prayer time, so the true dawn. So here's an example of how to calculate that. It's a math exercise basically. So if we imagine that on a given day, because these times change. But on a given day, that sunset is at 5:22 p.m. And not Maghrib, by the way. So this is when the sun, disappears behind the horizon. And that Fajr, the true dawn, is at 5:57 a.m. So this would be a night of 12 hours and 35 minutes from sunset to Fajr. So you can divide that by 2, so you get 6 hours and 17.5 minutes. So if you go from 5:22 p.m., add 6 hours and 17.5 minutes, then it takes you to 12:39 a.m. So Islamic midnight on that day would be 12:39 a.m. So that means the time for Isha prayers, it would become late. The time would be over at 12:39 a.m. The last thing that we have to consider before praying is the direction of prayer, the Qibla. Of course, it's not correct to just pray in any direction that we want. There's a particular direction that we have to face when we're performing the Salah, or the prayer. So this direction is towards the Holy Kaaba, or the Masjid al-Haram in the city of Mecca. So the prayer must be performed facing this Qibla, or this direction. Here in Texas and in North America in general, the direction is northeast, generally. And so obviously this can be discovered by, using a compass, or also now that we have, phones, you could look at Google Maps, for example, and determine which way is northeast. And of course, there are many apps that are available these days with Qibla compasses that can show you that. Now, you might wonder why northeast, because if you think about the globe, you might think that it seems like it should be more straight east, or maybe a little bit southeast or something like that. But the reason is because this northeasterly direction is the shortest path between where we are in North America and Masjid al-Haram in the city of Mecca. And so I drew a path here on Google Earth, and that shows that the shortest path is in a northeasterly direction. So you can see the beginning of the line here is beginning in or approximately the city of Dallas, going northeast, and then coming down here in the Arabian Peninsula to the city of Mecca and Masjid al-Haram. So that's, the proof, I guess you could say, that it should be northeast. And with this kind of, these kinds of technological things available to us now, you can, anywhere that you might go in the world, you could do the same thing to determine the direction, the compass direction for the Qibla from that place. So those are the 5 things that we have to consider before praying to make sure that our prayer is correct when we perform it. Ritual purity, the clothing that we wear during prayer, the place that we pray, the time that we pray, and the direction that we pray. Thank you, and Assalamu alaikum.